But we can watch this one.
Hey, yeah, you. Are
Yeah,
you new to the
you.
game, or maybe you're a veteran but have been living under a rock the past few years and are confused when you hear
I'm a
these weird
virgin.
terms like
Apparently
GCD,
soon not to be.
OGCD, two mins, drifting, weaving. What does it all mean? Why can't people just be clear with their words? Well, lucky for you, in this video I'm going to teach you exactly what those weird
Stormblood.
terms 14 boomers come up with.
Different eye
Let's
colors.
start with the repeat
Oh, we have
offender
that in
and
WoW,
what
actually.
people just can't stop commenting on my old guide videos with, the global cooldown. This includes your weapon skills and spells, all sharing a base
GCD.
cooldown of 2.5 seconds, which can
I
be
got it.
reduced through the skill or spell speed stat. Some of these GCDs are
haste.
locked behind a gauge requirement, and some do have a cooldown of their own on top of the GCD. Gnashing Fang Combo and Gunbreaker is a good example, which then leads me into the ABC. Not to be confused with the alphabetical
We have the same
ABC,
rule.
I'm not your caretaker, please. On FF14, this means always be casting. This goes for
DPS
melees
gain.
and casters. You always want to keep that GCD rolling when there is an enemy to target, including ranged attacks and resource builders. Which reminds me, don't neglect your resource builders during phase downtime either. Some jobs can still benefit from no enemy to attack, like Monk's Meditation, Samurai's Meditate, and Black Mage's Umbral Soul, just for example. Then we have the OGCD, meaning off global cooldown. The game refers to these as abilities.
pretty similar
All of your
stuff in WoW
abilities
then,
have
yeah.
individual cooldowns. These include defensive
You
cooldowns,
weave them
healing
in.
cooldowns, and damaging cooldowns. While on the topic of abilities, we have raid buffs. These are abilities that will increase everyone's damage output by buffing the entire party or debuffing the enemy, also referred to as 2 mins or just 2-minute
Always
cooldowns.
playing
These include
chat.
Scholar's Change Stratagem, Astrologian's
really good at that.
Divination, Monk's Brotherhood, Dragoon's Battle Litany and Dragon Sight, Ninja's Mug, Reaper's Arcane Circle, Bard's Battle Voice and Radiant Finale, Dancer's Technical Step and Devilment, Summoner's Searing Light, and finally, Red Mage's Embolden. Wow, that's a lot. And then
That was a lot. That was really a lot. Jesus. So, does every class have something that can buff? Was that every class? I don't know if that was even every class. But a lot of classes have something that buffs all their mates then. Most of them.
next up, this may seem obvious to some of you, but for those who are new to
Raid
MMOs,
wides.
you might wonder what things such as AoEs and raid wides mean, and
Area
the
of
difference
effect.
between avoidable and unavoidable damage. AoE is short for area of effect. This includes your own and enemies' AoE attacks and debuffs. These can range from avoidable AoEs, usually indicated by a visual effect, or unavoidable AoEs, or damage, also referred to as raid wides, because
Raid
they hit
wides,
the
we have
entire
the
raid
same.
group and
We have the
cannot
same
be
in WoW.
avoided. While on the topic of damaging AoEs, let's talk about stacks, spreads, pairs, light parties, clock spots, and color pairs. Most of these terms are self-explanatory, but they do tie well in together, and you're going to need this information going into the game. Stacks require either the whole party to stack together or form light parties to stack. Light parties consist of 4 players each, separated by having 1 tank, 1 healer, and 2 DPS in each light party. Groups are named accordingly. Group 1 for main tank, healer 1, melee 1, and ranged 1, and the other being Group 2 for the off tank, healer 2, melee 2, and range 2. All of which will be shortened to MT, OT, H1, H2, M1, M2, R1, and R2. If you end up...
Okay, so do you always run that comp? Rage Q Panda, thank you for the follow. Do you always run that comp? Like 2 tanks, 2 healers, 2 range, 2 melee? Like pretty much always. Generally. What about what were the raids where you can, it was like, what was it, 28 or 24 people? Up to between 24 and 48 or something? Like the more casual raids, was it? Dungeons are 4. So then you have 1 tank, 1 heal, 1 melee, 1 range. But I guess you can have like 2 melee or 2 range or something. Right. So you go 1, 2, 5, and then you have that times 3. So you have 3 tanks, 6 healers, 15 deeps. Okay, that makes sense. It's pretty similar like ratios than with WoW as well.
With 1 less melee in your group, that's okay. One of the range can fulfill the role of being M1 or M2 and will be considered the fake melee. These groups can also be separated by a role for some mechanics.
How about interrupts and stuff? Like while we're on the topic of group comps and stuff, you have like in WoW, tanks and melees usually have a 16-second cooldown interrupt for kicking abilities, but ranged DPS usually have between 20 and 24, and sometimes like 2 of them have a 45-second cooldown on their interrupt. So generally, if there's a lot of kicking, we call it kicking, because back in Classic WoW, the rogue ability was called Kick, and that was like the first one that anyone got. So interrupts are just called kicks. So you generally don't want to like stack you want to balance out like how many kicks you have in your party to get all the interrupts done. If there's a lot of kicking to be done, you don't want to have like a balanced druid in WoW and like a shadow priest in the same group. You're going to be really, really limited. So do you kind of sometimes plan parties around, or how does it work? Like, does everyone have the same amount of cooldown on their interrupt, or do different classes have like different cooldowns? Basically, I guess that's my question. Tanks and melee DPS. All right, so range, it's not something range have to worry about. That's actually kind of interesting because in WoW, the interrupting as a range is really annoying. Like, you're halfway through like a big dick cast and you're like, oh man, this is going so sweet, and you got like stop your cast to interrupt and then start, and it kind of like ruins all your momentum and stuff. On a melee DPS, it's just off. It's like like you said here, like it's off the global cooldown. So you have all your DPS abilities on global cooldown, so they're like queuing up behind each other, and then you can just kick whenever you want because it's always off, off global cooldown. So it doesn't really hinder you in any way. But in ranged, it is still off the global cooldown, but because you're usually like casting, it will cancel your cast to use it. So while it's not like you're not like locked out of it by the global cooldown, it does still like put you back in terms of like you doing your DPS stuff. And sometimes when classes have like ramping up time before they've got like big damage windows and stuff, maybe you have like a little bit of setup where you've got to like do a combo. If you like have to delay that to do your interrupt, it can be like, it's probably just like a minor DPS loss and like a bit of an inconvenience, but it just feels really shit. It just feels like getting like sack tapped, getting punched in the dick or something. The low blow. It feels like a low blow. Healers will adjust. Just kill. Roger that. All right, we're done talking about interrupts,
like
guys.
Support being one like party and DPS being
healers
the other.
will
Support
adjust.
Referring to tanks and healers. Spreads are when every player will be targeted by an AoE. That is either a cleave or circle AoE. For these, we typically
have the same kind of ability,
spots, with each player having a position around the arena.
Spread like the Olympic rings.
A 12-hour clock, with north being 12 and south being 6. Each player will have a predefined position, but you don't have to worry too much about a literal clock. Most groups will use waymarks, and just familiarize yourself with your waymark. Speaking of waymarks, we have pairs or partners, however you want to word it. These mechanics will either target all the support or all DPS. So to solve this, we'll need to pair supports with DPS. Before starting a high-end encounter, you'll usually assign yourself with a partner. These can be done through which group you are or colored pairs. For groups, tanks and healers are always paired with a melee or ranged accordingly, like the main tank being paired with M1 and the off tank being paired with M2, for example, or color pairs. Remember your clock spots and having your own waymark? Well, for colored pairs, all you have to do is remember your waymark and the other waymark of the same color, like how 1 and A are the same color. These two will always be paired for these mechanics. I guess I should also mention baiting.
Are the arenas always circular? So you can do the clock thing, or you just adapt based on where the boss is being tanked or something? So if it's like a rectangle, you'll just, like, if the boss is here, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example. Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Some mechanics will require a player to forcefully be targeted by a mechanic, and we call this baiting,
Triangle.
like the boss targeting the furthest away or closest player. And then we have personals. If you hear this term, it refers to abilities that heal or mitigate damage on yourself. These should be used when you need an extra heal or to mitigate damage to help you healers out. These include melee's and physical ranged Second Wind, melee's Bloodbath, Monk's Riddle of Earth, Ninja's Shade Shift, Samurai's Third Eye, Reaper's Arcane Crest, Black Mage's Mana Ward, and Summoner's Radiant Aegis. While on the topic of healing and mitigating, we also have Party Mits, short for Party Mitigation. Same idea as personals. You want to use these for things such as raid wides, stacks, spreads, pairs, etc. Really in any form of outgoing damage. When you're doing...
We call these in WoW raid cooldowns, basically, where it would just be like a 20% damage reduction, like one of the most powerful ones in WoW. Holy Paladins bring, and it's called Aura Mastery, and it's like I think it's like a 15 or 20% damage reduction on the whole raid for like 6 seconds or 8 seconds or something. So you plan it all out in advance. I assume you probably do something similar. You plan it all out in advance, and you're like, okay, this person's going to use this ability here. So you always, for every spike of incoming damage on the group, you will counter it, or like premeditate a counter to it, and you'll like work out all the timings and stuff. So you just kind of like like you have a party mit for every single damage spike, pretty much. Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
Pug content, don't worry too much about where you're placing these. Just make
I could be
sure
wrong
to
there.
use them and keep it consistent on where you use them in an encounter, so your healers can get used to what mit you're using when and where. These include Tanks Reprisals, Paladins Divine Veil and Passage of Arms, Warriors Shake It Off, Dark Knight and
Shake it
Gunbreaker's
off.
Dark
That's
Mystery
cool.
and Heart of Light, Melee's Feint, Monk's Mantra, Reaper's Arcane Crest, Physical Ranged
These are
Troubadour,
going so
Tactician
quick.
and Shield Samba, Bard's Nature's Mini, Machinist's Dismantle, Dancers Curing Waltz and Improvisation, Magical Ranged Addle, and Red Mage's Magic Barrier. I didn't include Healer's Kit because I'd be listing almost all of their abilities, and this is kind of their main job. But you tanks and DPS are just as responsible for pressing these buttons. The biggest mistake I see some players make with party mitts and personals is just saving them for when they think stuff will get bad, which just isn't the way to use these. You want to use these to avoid those exact situations. Trust me, it helps a lot. Then we have a few other things like the opener. This is just how you begin a fight, so to speak, synergizing your buffs and abilities in such a way for the highest potential potency. After the opener, we have the odd minute burst and even minute burst window. The odd minute burst window is our weaker burst window, which includes our 1 minute cooldowns. Meanwhile, the even burst window is our stronger burst, as this includes our 1 minute and 2 minute cooldowns together.
That's pretty sick. Is it always 1 and 2 minute cooldowns? Or are there 3 minute cooldowns, 2.5 minute cooldowns, 1.5 minute cooldowns? Is it just always 1 and 2? Oh, that is so good, man. I don't know why WoW doesn't do that. It's so annoying when you have like some people have a 2 minute cooldown, some people have a 3 minute cooldown, some people have like a 45-second mini cooldown, some people have a 1.5 minute, some people have a 2.5 minute, which is just completely like, you might as well shit in your hands and clap, because that's just not getting synced up with anything. It's really hard to like stack offensive cooldowns, right? You have like, cooldown stacking is really, really powerful. And sometimes you can't really do that, but if everything's normalized, like you said, into 1 and 2, that just makes everything easier to plan out, right? Because I imagine, like, I can't even remember what he's called it, but the thing where, like you guys said, like a lot of classes have them where you can buff, like, is it party buff or something? What's it called? Yeah, you'd want to sync it with people's like damage cooldowns, right? So you buff everyone 20% when they're about to pop their cooldowns. So it's like stacking, same kind of concept. So do you get to a point very often where you have to hold cooldowns, or is it usually you use your cooldowns on cooldown? That's like the general rule of thumb in WoW. In general, just use on cooldown, but occasionally if there's like a damage, like either you're gonna get like a big steroid, like a damage buff or something, or something's going to take more damage, or there's like a really high priority ad that needs to die like very quickly. They're like the pretty much only instances you would ever hold cooldowns to get more overall value, where like the DPS you'd gain from holding is bigger than the DPS you lose by potentially missing out on a use over the course of the fight, right? Usually hold for boss. Really? Okay. So do you get people that like pad? You have padders in this game who like cheese on ads and stuff, use all their cooldowns on AoE to get more overall damage. Oh yes. This is like, I gotta give you a sneak preview. This is my this is my guild Discord here, right? This is me right up here. Up at the top, baby. I guess the only time you realistically can hold, like, let's say the fight's gonna be 6 minutes and 30 seconds, right? You would get 4 uses of your 2 minute cooldown, let's say. So on pull on 2 minutes, on 3 minutes, on pull on 2 minutes, on 4 minutes, on 6, and then the fight would end. If you delayed, you might, on pull 2 minutes 15. Then the earliest you can use is 4 minutes 15. But if you delay that one to like 4:50, then you miss out on one, right? Because 6:50 the fight ends or whatever. But yeah, if you're not gonna lose a cast, then you can kind of get away with holding. If you will benefit, either movement wise, you'll have less downtime during your cooldown, like if you don't have to move or something, or if you can use it on more targets, or damage increase, whatever. Yeah, it's very high end, but I come from like a pretty high end WoW background, so my brain just starts thinking about all this stuff. I'm probably not like your average new player to the game who's like, I don't know, maybe I'm stereotyping, but like my brain just like ticks on to all these little things where I start thinking about like the min max. I don't want to think about like the end game and the min max yet, but it's just interesting to kind of ask those questions, right?
Alongside party buffs. Then we have the reopener. This is typically another way to just say the even minute burst window, but this could also mean a true reopener, which means you'll have all of your cooldowns back up during a 2-minute burst window, but only really a few jobs benefit from this, like Dark Knight with their Salted Earth and Monk with their Riddle of Wind, which are both on 90-second cooldowns. I think that's the only two abilities that actually are damaging and on a 90-second cooldown. Drifting.
Oh, that sounds annoying. Drifting.
No, not that drifting. On FF14, this simply means you misaligned your cooldowns with the rest of your kit or party raid buffs. For example, if I was playing Dark Knight and I didn't save my gauge for Living Shadow and it just came off cooldown, but I can't use it as my gauge is at 0, so I need to farm 50 gauge and it sits on cooldown for about 10 seconds. This will drift my Living Shadow out of raid buffs for the entirety of the encounter, and the only possible fix here is realigning in downtime. In most cases, you never want to hold on to a big buff like Living Shadow just to purposely realign it, as you will potentially miss a usage, and that is a significant potency loss. So if you do end up drifting, in most cases, you just have to accept that fate, and you will be drifted for this entire encounter. OGCD
skill issue.
This is when you use an OGCD in between your GCD.
That's a skill issue.
The only realistic way to actually use OGCDs. Most tanks and melee jobs can weave 2 OGCDs in between every
controller problem,
with few exceptions. We call this double weaving. Healers and casters can, for the most part, fit 1 OGCD between each cast. We call this single weaving, and 2 OGCDs if they use an instant cast. Do note that casters are quite unique in this regard, with different cast times and instant abilities, so this is just something you're going to have to mess with yourself, like how red mages have dual cast every other cast. Then there's triple and quad weaving. This is not something we want to catch ourselves doing, and is mostly a meme, but honestly, it can happen to the best of us. Just try to avoid it as much as possible. GCD clipping. This is if you use too many OGCDs or use an OGCD too late and get animation locked, you can clip into your GCD, which can result in a potency loss if done consistently throughout an encounter. To avoid clipping into your GCD, identify how many OGCDs you can weave between GCD windows, and also identify...
He has said GCD so many times that my brain is actually melting. I swear. GCD, 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 OGCD, OOO, GCD, OOOO, GCD. Man, I've actually lost the plot, bro.
The animation lock of some OGCDs, as they can also clip into your GCD if used in the GCD window. A good example of this is Dragoon's jumps if you suffer high latency. There's some advanced ways to get rid of GCD clipping as well, and this is slide casting and max melee. Slide casting mostly applies to casters and healers. This is when you move near the end of your cast, but it hasn't quite finished yet.
That's cool, though.
How the servers work, the cast will not be interrupted. As there are various cast times, you can move too early and interrupt the cast. There are 2 ways about this. Either individually learn each cast on when to move, or simply put an emote somewhere on your hotbar and wait for the emote to glow up. When this happens, it's safe to move without your cast being interrupted. Cool. Max melee applies to the emote to glow up. When this happens, it's safe to move without your...
When they're grey, he can't move.
Interrupted.
When it goes white, that's your trigger.
As there are various cast times, you can move too early and interrupt the cast. There are 2 ways about this. Either individually learn each cast on when to move, or simply put an emote somewhere on your hotbar and wait for the emote to glow up. When this happens, it's safe to move without your cast being interrupted. Max melee applies to tanks and melee DPS. This is when you go as far as possible from an enemy, but still close enough to keep your GCD rolling. The reason for doing this varies, like a boss using an AoE around it, but leaving enough room for max melee, or if you need to bait a certain mechanic but still want to maintain uptime. Just to list a few examples. Slide casting and max melee are 2 important skills to have to fully maximize your damage output, which is important, especially in a raid environment, because Final Fantasy is all about that sweet damage. Kitchen sinking. Imagine you just throw all of your dishes into the sink at once. It's quite surprising how much this analogy just makes sense. This mostly applies to tanks and healers. For tanks, this is when you use every defensive cooldown except your invulnerability to negate incoming damage. like
that's
from
how
a
I
tank
play
buster.
Blood DK
A mostly
in
taboo
WoW.
strategy, as it's better
pop
to spread out
everything.
your cooldowns as a tank, but it is sometimes required for fights
Kitchen
like some
sinking.
tank busters in Savage and Ultimate raids, or when you know you won't need the cooldown backup for the next 90 seconds or so. For healers, it's kind of the same
Hello,
deal,
Savage,
using all
okay.
of your healing and mitigation tools at once. Again, this is mostly taboo, but there have been some cases where it's proved to be valuable to do so. Either way, it's good to know what these terms
Sounds
mean when you
bad.
hear it next
Kitchen
time,
sinking.
and that goes for all of these terms. By this point, you should be well versed in the most important terms and analogy FF14 players use when it comes to gameplay mechanics.
Okay, look. Adrastea, if there's one thing I've learned so far, healers adapt. Healers adapt. Okay.
Anyways, that'll do it for this video. Thank you for watching, and like always, a big thank you to my Patreons for supporting
Healers
the
will
channel.
adapt.
More information about Patreon in the description
have
below.
to.
But with that, before I forget, I'm going to make this a video series. Boomer raid terms next. Maybe it's already out for you if you're watching late. Anyways, have a nice day. Bye.
Yeah.
Oh, and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. That was good. That was good. I got it. I'm learning quick. We can always rescue. What's rescue? Oh, it's like a life grip. Yeah, we literally have that ability actually on evokers now called rescue. And you can like pick people up and move them to a spot. Whereas life grip, you like suck you grip them.